Hello again. Welcome to the 15th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment Virtual Campus Conference. Our session is You Can't Spell Co-Teach Without Collaboration. We have with us Kate File and Susan Rozzi. Is that right, Rozzi? Okay. Both from the College of Charleston. And I'll let them give more details about what they do. Take it away.
So I'll get us started. So as I was introduced, Susan Rozzi, and I'm the Exercise Science Program Director, and I'm an Associate Professor at the College of Charleston. I teach primarily in our Exercise Science program, and I have taught in athletic training, but like I said, currently in Exercise Science.
And I'm Kate File, and I'm also an associate professor at the College of Charleston, and I'm currently the department chair for health and human performance. And my teaching expertise or area is also exercise science and kind of a sports medicine, athletic training background.
I think you skipped one. There you go. All right, great. So in this session, I'm actually going to talk in the first part of the session, and then Kate will talk in the second part of it. But what we'd like to do today is describe our experience in co-teaching. We've co-taught an asynchronous online course 2 springs ago, or no, this past spring.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about our approach and our planning process, some challenges we faced along the way, and how we made some adjustments. It was the first time for both of us co-teaching. It was not our first time teaching asynchronous online course, but it was the first time of co-teaching, and it was the first time teaching this course. We want to discuss what you should consider and strategies to apply when you are co-teaching, and then we want to make sure you have some big picture takeaway messages that you can incorporate if you're thinking about co-teaching a course. Maybe you go back one slide, Kate.
Yeah, there you go.
Good. Okay. Well, if you can, in the Zoom chat, if you could just briefly give us a little bit about you. We're interested just to see who's listening to us, what your discipline or content area of teaching, what types of classes you teach, what that content looks like, and just briefly your degree of experience or your level of interest in co-teaching. Is it something you've thought about doing, but or are there people in your department who are co-teaching and you are just kind of curious about that experience? Or are you an experienced co-teacher and you've done that multiple semesters with multiple courses? So if you have a minute, just drop that into the chat, and it might help us in directing some of our explanation later on.
Well, Kristen types. So Kristen's one of our regular attendees, actually, for more than one conference. So I'm not an instructor. I've been generally in positions like director of distance education, that kind of thing. So I've done workshops. I've taught faculty how to teach online, either face-to-face, or my preference is online. They should get the experience of what it's like to be an online student. But that's where I come from. Kristen, I'm sure, is different.
Hi, yeah, this is Kristen. So I'm an instructional technologist designer, and I don't really teach per se online, but I support all graduate programs that are online, whether they're synchronous or asynchronous. But I do conduct teaching to teach our faculty on how to do quality online course with best practices and kind of walk them through the development phase of their course. and then through the course itself. Then afterwards, doing like a retrospective where we sit down and do a deep dive on what worked, what didn't work, for the next time that course is taught by that instructor. And I've been doing that for about 2 years.
Great. Well, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. We have a similar program or course, it sounds like, at our institution, where you, in order to teach online, you are enrolled in an online class. And Susan and I have both actually completed that, but we've also been faculty mentors for other faculty who are going through that course. And so I know as instructional technologists, you may not consider yourself teachers, but you guys are teaching all the time. You just don't have specific course names or, class assignments with rosters and things. But I've learned a lot from our instructional technologists. So hopefully you have an opportunity to learn a little bit from us today. All right, so next slide. There we go.
All right, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a background of the experience that Kate and I had with this particular experience of co-teaching. So here was our situation. As I said, I was a program director, and Kate was in a position, and still is, as our department chair. And we have a existing 400 level scientific writing course. It's a 3 credit hour course. It had been taught online asynchronously. And we had a number of students signed up for that course. We were offering it in the spring semester, it was this past spring. And it was the final semester for the students in that class. Most of them, I think all of them, were seniors. And so we're planning on taking that course as a requirement of their degree. So it was a necessary course. We had put it on the schedule. We were planning to teach it. And at the last minute, there was not a faculty member to teach that course. So there was no adjunct. There was no full-time faculty that were able and willing to teach the course. And as time was going on, we started to think, well, okay, what are we going to do now? So 1 week before the first day of classes is when we decided, okay, we cannot find somebody to teach this who's qualified and willing to do it. So we decided between the two of us that we were going to co-teach the class. We had never co-taught before. And so we decided, okay, we'll just give it a try and see what happens. But let me give you a little bit more about the course and about us as faculty members. First of all, the course had been taught as an asynchronous online course for multiple semesters by 3 different instructors, none of which were currently in the department. So there was nobody in the department who currently taught it or had taught it that was currently in the department. And it had gone through a number of iterations as it had moved from one faculty member to the other. And the materials had actually been passed down. A lot of the assignments, a lot of the grading rubrics, a lot of the videos and things had been passed down from one instructor to the next over the years. And so the course content kind of crossed disciplines. So it was a scientific writing class, and it was not specific to either our public health program or our exercise science in particular. What's interesting is neither of us had taught this class before. So this was not a class that we just decided we would teach because one of us had the experience or the other one had the experience. Neither one of us had. And so for us, the good news was that we were both very familiar with the course content. We have our own scientific writing experiences. So we were very familiar with what was being taught. It wasn't as if we were being asked to teach an exercise physiology class or motor development, something that we didn't feel comfortable with. We were comfortable with, having done our own scientific writing. We had mentored student research projects, our own writing and our own research, and we both had served as journal manuscript reviewers. So felt comfortable with the whole scientific writing process. So content-wise, we were very comfortable with the course. We were also very comfortable with both of our teaching skills and our abilities. So and more importantly, we had a history of working together. I had served as the athletic training program director for a number of years, and Kate had also been in that position. So we had done accreditation reports. We had the year before revised our exercise science major and a bunch of coursework. So we knew that we could work well together. We also have very similar student expectations. So the level of expectation in our classes is very similar. And so that made it easy for us to think about, okay, if we taught this together, it would probably be at about the same level of academic rigor. And lastly, and maybe kind of most importantly, our offices are on the same hallway. So that made it really easy for us to think about, hey, if we collaborate, we spend a lot of time together. Co-teaching, may just be one more thing that we do together. So that made that decision kind of easy for us. So that was our situation. What I'd like both of you to do that are joining us is to identify, if you can, one or more colleagues that you have a history of working together with. Somebody who you have a similar teaching philosophy to or style, and think about working with that person on co-teaching a class. The other thing I want you to think about is there a course or that's in your major or that's adjacent to? And by that, I mean, like, in our situation, Kate and our area of expertise is athletic training, exercise science. Scientific writing was a little bit outside of our area of expertise, but it was close enough to what we felt strength in. Something that you haven't taught that you could co-teach with a colleague, maybe something that you could identify as, that's an area of interest to me, and that's might be a class I want to think about. Anybody want to chime in?
Well, I can, in a previous life, trying to put together a faculty training program for faculty teaching online, and working with colleagues in different colleges to do that. And the hard thing, you might say this was co-teaching with like 5 people, not just 2. And trying to get, in this case, it was like herding cats. It's supposed to be, it was going to be a 6-week program. Well, if we did everything everybody wanted to do, it'd be like a, 45-week program. Yeah. And, trying to get everything down to what is essential was the hardest part. And, that was a real chance. We finally did, but, I'm asking, can we cut this? Oh no, that's really important. Well, what about that? No, that's really important. They can't, we got so much time. So that was, for me, the challenge, to get everybody kind of rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that challenge for sure. Next
Yes,
slide.
I have about the same type of situation as Bob does. Co-teaching with other people on campus in this online environment that we do for our faculty. Like Bob said, trying to herd cat is it's difficult.
Okay. So I want to talk about how we approach this. Now, remember, we had 1 week before classes started. We had a course that neither one of us had ever taught before. It was an asynchronous online course, although we both taught online. So we had to figure out, okay, what's our approach going to be? Here's what we decided to do. We actually sat down and just decided on a couple of things. First of all, we decided we're not going to lock ourselves into the existing course materials. We weren't going to keep perpetuating the use of those course materials. We're going to start from scratch we did look back and say, was there anything we thought was valuable, but we just decided we weren't going to just say, okay, here's the assignments for that course. Which ones do you want to do? Which ones do I want to do? How are we going to do those assignments? So that freeing ourselves of that was the first thing. Then we discussed what we wanted our students to know and learn. I think that was probably the most important discussion, was just to, and I've heard this from our technology people as well, when you're teaching an online class, is so take that time and think about, what did we really want our students to know and learn in this class? We of course, the course had student learning objectives and course objectives that we had to somewhat adhere to, but we also wanted to go beyond those and make a bigger picture, and also to make the course more current. This course had been taught years ago, designed years ago, and we wanted to change some focus, such as different ways of disseminating through social media and other things that we wanted to do differently. So we redesigned the course based on those course objectives and what we had identified as our student goals. And that was a nice place to start. We also agreed that we weren't going to divide and conquer, but instead we were going to truly collaborate. And I think that was really important too, because when you think of co-teaching, that obviously that's where we wanted to go, was just collaborate and teach, and not just you do this part and I'll do that, and then we'll get through the semester. And then we made a commitment to ensuring consistency across all of the modules and throughout the course. And I'll talk more about what that looked like. But these were the tenets of how we had set up the course and the decisions we made very early on, early in the first time we met. And then we stuck to this throughout the semester.
I could see where if you didn't collaborate, it'd be essentially 2 courses in one, and they may have meshed well together or not. They could have been very different, and it would have been probably jarring for students to have 2 very different approaches.
We were very, I'm glad that you said that, because we were very acutely aware that our students would be very vocal if this was not, if there were any hiccups as far as the grading process or how we delivered the information, and if this was not at the caliber that they were used to. So we wanted to make sure that we did that. So here are the initial steps that we took. So we agreed on those tenets to begin with, and then we agreed on course topics, the format, the content, as well as the learning materials. So we just hammered that out for the entire semester. We chose not to go week by week and stay a little bit ahead. We set everything up ahead of time. And the biggest decision we made was, one of the biggest was, due to this content area, it crosses so many different disciplines that we decided, instead of us creating our own voice threads or any type of videos or recorded lectures, we decided to lean into the publicly available resources. There's a lot of high quality online lectures when it comes to scientific writing. There are a lot of published papers. There's a lot of high quality information and materials that are already out there. They're, from writing centers, from Purdue Law, all kinds of resources. And we didn't feel like we needed to either repeat what they were already saying or say it in our own way. And we had to, when we decided to do that, we had to realize that we were going to have to communicate that well to the students, that was intentional, and that was because there was no need for us to reiterate all of that. We agreed on the number of learning materials. We went through each module and agreed how we would set those up, and how many assessments we would do to ensure consistency across each module. Okay. So what were our initial steps? So we created a shared document and we detailed the course outline. So we had the learning objectives. We took each module and we created these, what we call target questions for each of the modules to give students direction and to convey our expectations. We knew we were using a a variety of materials, whether they were websites or readings or videos. And so we wanted to give the student information as far as what did we think was the focus, what was important for them to know, what did we want them to really learn and be able to understand. And so instead of, we didn't want to feel like we just tossed them a bunch of information and that they didn't have any direction. So, and then we also decided each module, the assessment that we would do. So the activity to practice their writing skills, and then an application. So each module had a kind of a practice, a smaller stakes, lower stakes assignment, and then an application where they took that to the next level. So, and then there was a cross the course assessment, which had multiple parts. And this was where the more intensive writing, where they were writing and revising. And that multiple part assignment was through, like I said, across the whole course. So there were, to reiterate, module assignments and then across the course assignment. Okay. So when we had 6 modules, so we had all of our content, we divided it into 6 modules. And we divided those up between the 2 of us to teach. And we didn't want to have we didn't want to have a silo effect at all. So instead of me teaching the first 3 modules, the first half of the year, and Kate teaching the second, we actually alternated. We actually looked at our schedules and determined what were going to be our busy times of the semester. And we both picked to teach during the time that was less busy based on our schedule. So, you know, it actually worked out really well that we alternated one after the other. And then we created this grading system for within and across module assignments. As I said, we were acutely aware that our students would be sensitive to the fact of how was their grade going to be calculated if we had 2 people teaching them, and we just anticipated there being some concern about that. So what we did was we made sure that these 2 activities that I talked about, the module activity and the application assignment, within each module was graded by the person who was teaching that particular module. So if I had module 1, I graded both of the assignments in module 1. And then we had this across module assignment, the long writing assignment, and that was broken into 3 pieces. And what we did was we took the students and we assigned them, we split them into between the 2 of us. So I had half and Kate had half of the students. And we graded all aspects of that project throughout the semester. That way there wasn't a mix of feedback. They weren't hearing one thing, they were consistently getting feedback on that writing assignment throughout the semester. And that way we feel like we wanted to have that consistency of the instructor's impact on the student's grade. We did lean into some grading rubrics for each of the assignments, so we created those. Even though Kate and I realized that we gave feedback differently, the rubrics really helped to standardize what our expectations were and standardize scoring, particularly as it changed from module to module. Okay, so the other points I just want to point out are that at the start of this semester, we notified our students of the co-teaching format. So we had planned on how exactly we were going to do it, and then we let the students know. We then had on our syllabus and course schedule very clear exactly who was teaching what and how they were going to be graded and how their final grade would be calculated. At the start of each module, when each module opened up, there was a message or a video from the person that was teaching. So if I was teaching module 1, it was from me, letting the students know that I was the contact person, that I was the person that was going to be grading their assignments, that if they had any questions to communicate directly to me, and that I was responsible for that module. And that way there wasn't, we tried to ward off a lot of the students just emailing both of us or just randomly selecting one of us. Throughout the semester, Kate and I met regularly, both formally and informally. And then we discussed content, we discussed assignments, the feedback from the students, and then we kind of tweaked things as we went along, as we needed to. And I think, by the end of the semester, we were able to look at all of the students' assignments. We discussed their grades, and the final grade that we assigned them, we actually came together and calculated and agreed upon based on all of our assessments. So it was very collaborative from the beginning right through to assigning the students their final grade.
All right, so this is my portion. So, Susan did a great job of kind of giving you guys the background and talking about how we went about planning. I want to focus in on some of the strategies or maybe things to consider, and then our takeaways. And we'll wrap this up. So, we've been trying to get you to think about your own situation. So maybe think about things that would be important to you, or things that you might want to consider in identifying somebody else, another colleague or contributor who would be a nice collaborative match. So, for example, for Susan and I, she mentioned we do have a history of working together, and as a result, we do have similar work expectations for our students. I know that the two of you here don't necessarily have students, so thinking about what are other factors that could negatively or positively affect your work relationship with a collaborator on a project or with a class.
Well, it helps to have already have a relationship. I was thinking that the whole thing, you guys had a built-in advantage in terms of collaboration. You already knew each other, you essentially worked together already, as opposed to two adjuncts working remotely.
Yeah.
I
think
if
that'd
I
be
were
a
doing it,
recipe for disaster, in my opinion. As chair, I would never assign that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly I'd look at personalities, their teaching style.
Mhm.
If they're really different, I'd be concerned how well they're going to match. I'd probably want to look at how well organized are their classes. Are they similar, or is one of them more, fly by the seat of their pants kind of teacher, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think those are all really good examples, Bob. You hit a lot of the ones that we wanted to focus on. So, how are you deciding who's a good match for you? Some of the things that, we think would be important is to consider student expectations. We all have different styles. We all have approaches. How lenient are you with students? How much do you hold them accountable? What are your expectations about late work? All of those little things can create conflict or can make it harder to work together with somebody if you haven't discussed them on the front end. I mean, that's where having a syllabus is helpful, because you're essentially sort of making that contract, not just with your student, but you have to make that contract with your collaborator at that time. So student expectations, level of rigor, Susan talked about that a little bit already. Our approach to grading and feedback, this is probably something that we probably could have done a little bit more. We knew we wanted to use rubrics, but we didn't discuss how are we going to give individualized feedback. And so I tended to do that within a document. Again, this was a scientific writing class, so a student would submit a draft of something that they had written. I tended to make changes within that draft or put comments within it. And I think Susan tended to kind of create a list of questions or feedback that she had based on that writing. At the end of the day, the types of comments that we were making were very similar when we sat down. It was more so just the formatting in which we provided that feedback. But if some people don't give individualized feedback, and then students are kind of, being and flowing between these two instructors, and it's difficult for them to have some consistency and know, am I improving over the course of the span of this course? And so I think that's an important piece. Thinking about the, prerequisites, and are you guys both familiar with that, right? And then, lastly, just sort of that student feedback method that, that I mentioned. And it did differ based on the different assignments. So the intensity of which we gave feedback, or the extensiveness, maybe is a better word, was different depending on the, the significance of that assignment. So some may have been a simple, a numbered rubric versus others were rubric plus individualized feedback.
As chair, would you, if you have two faculty who've never co-taught that course, would you also define some expectations from you, like what kind of feedback, how often kind of feedback, and say, I know you two haven't co-taught this before. Here are some general guidelines that we think would help you be successful. Would you ever do that without infringing on,
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it probably would depend on where those faculty are in their career. I mean, I think I would be, as chair, if I'm approving a co-teaching scenario, I'm already considering personalities, and I think it's one of my responsibilities is to have an opinion or perspective on what that person's teaching style is. I've hopefully evaluated them in the classroom. I've looked at their online course materials before. So I think I would feel, or I should say, in order to feel comfortable approving a co-teaching, I would need to have that information on the front end, right? And then I think your recommendation or your question is spot on. I think it'd be great to provide them with some things to consider, or at least have a conversation, the three of us, as we're meeting to finalize this this workload arrangement, that make sure you guys discuss on the front end, because for those of you who have been a chair or have interest in, what is that you end up being the endpoint for student concerns, right? So if I can proactively prevent that, then I'm essentially limiting my workload on the back end with that student issue that might come rearing its head if it's a bad course experience for those students. So I think that's a really good suggestion that maybe I need to jot down. So, I think the other thing that we wanted to consider and focus on is the grading, because as we know, students are very concerned about grades, right? It's not necessarily did they learn something in that class, but what grade did they get to demonstrate that they learned something? So, thinking about what are those assignments that you have in your classes if you're considering co-teaching, what challenges could arise from having two people grade them? Is that an easy thing to grade? Is there a lot of subjectivity? How can you maybe eliminate some of that subjectivity and increase objectivity? For the purposes of time, I'm going to kind of speed through this, but just something to think about, as you're making a decision about co-teaching. So
I was just going to say, this is where a well-done rubric,
yes,
those assignments, is really essential. Otherwise, you'll get two people have different ideas what is A-level work, or but I think that's where the rubric is essential that they follow.
and we totally agree with you, which is why we created rubrics for pretty much all of our assignments, I think. So the way that our grading, that we planned it out is that Susan mentioned that we had, two different graders for these sort of ongoing or larger impact assignments. And that ended up representing a third of the student's grade. So while it was a large portion, it wasn't the end all be all, right? And one of the things that we did do for that to enhance grading consistency is that we together developed a rubric. And so what that meant for us is that we literally sat down together and thought about, hey, what are the components of this assignment? What are the categories within that rubric? What are the evaluative criteria that need to fall in that? What's the point distribution or percentage distribution of those things? So that it wasn't, this is Kate's rubric that Susan's now applying to the student. She doesn't really know what this term means or what I'm looking for in this evaluative criteria, right? And so I think again, that was our approach to the collaboration versus divide and conquer. In a divide and conquer model, I would say, hey, this is my assignment, or I'll take this one, you do the next one, right? I'll make this rubric, you make the next rubric. And those rubrics could look very different. And so then the students are seeing sort of two different structures for creating rubrics, two different sort of, the wording is different within those. And so we tried to focus on the consistency in order to improve the student's experience and to make sure that, we were also on the same page so that it made sense when we went to use that rubric. One thing that we didn't do, what we discussed doing, and I think I would encourage this for people moving forward, was to maybe do a little bit of a crossover grading to help calibrate that rubric, right? Take 1 to 2 or 3 students' assignments, and you're each grading both of those, right? So there's one portion of students in the class that are getting double graded. They don't necessarily need to see both of those rubrics from the co-instructors, but that before you assign the grade for the student, you're basically just confirming that, this is how you scored it. You gave this person a 3 out of 4. I gave them a 3.5 out of 4. Where are the differences here? Can we kind of get a better understanding of how you were using this tool versus how I was using that tool? So that's something I think that we could have done to improve. We talked about it and we just did not implement it. I think from a timing standpoint, and from a transparency standpoint, we had about, I think, 12 students in this class. And so, if there were more, I think we could have done that. But we were able to really talk about the students on an individual level because there were only 12. So that was helpful. Another strategy considers communication, right? So we found it really beneficial to have ongoing communication. Susan mentioned formal and informal meetings. That meant that we probably about, I would say, twice a month scheduled a time on our calendars to say, okay, we need to talk about what's coming up next in the class, reflect back on the previous module. But then we also, because we were on the same hall, we were able to just sort of pop in and say, hey, I was working on this. Can you look at it real fast and just give me some feedback, right? And so that ongoing communication was really helpful. And I think it made for a good partnership, right? I mean, we think about that in our relationships outside of work, but it also obviously relates back to our work relationships with strong communication skills. And so, thinking about your own situation, what would you want out of that partnership or that collaboration, right? Do you want someone to come by your office and, throw out an idea? Or are you more of like a block schedule person where you have very dedicated times where you're working on different things? And so your expectation is that I can't really handle this drive-by right now. And can we find a time on our calendars where we can both meet? And I think it's really important to not just send emails. We found that, there's a limitation to communicating in a written format, and email people take tones differently. You get tired of reading them, you make them overly short or whatever. And so it's helpful to actually have a conversation. So maybe look at some examples as part of those discussions. And we also found that these a lot of the times our informal conversations were more about the students. So how did the student do on that assignment? This one student struggled. Oh, that's interesting. They struggled on my assignment in the last module. And that was an opportunity for us to sort of check in with that student. We have some reporting mechanisms at our institution where we could say, we're worried about your progress in this class. And so we could submit that if that became an issue. Or just, hey, there's been some ongoing inactivity within our online class. Dr. Razi noticed it in module 2, Dr. Fowler noticed it in module 3. Like, can we schedule time to meet with you with a student? Otherwise, if she and I weren't talking, that student can go, for 4 or 5 weeks, depending on the length of the module, without anybody kind of catching in on that. So that was really helpful too. And I think this is our last major strategy to consider is just adjusting, being willing to say our original plan was not perfect, right? It's always great to be able to make adjustments. So first time course preps are never perfect. First time teaching with others are not always perfect. It might not have turned out the way you want, but is that a reason to just kind of throw it out and say, I'm never going to do that again? So, being willing to acknowledge that, and maybe also at the front end, talk about when, what are some signs or indicators of when we feel like we might need to make adjustments. And those might be indicators in terms of how, the collaborative relationship is going, but also indicators from the students too. So we wanted to try to get some feedback from the students after I think the first 2 modules, that we had each taken on. So that was through an informal like midterm evaluation survey. How is this going? Do you guys feel like the flow makes sense? Does it feel consistent, right? Some of those things that we're really striving for, and just getting the students' input. Not that, what they say is the end all be all, but if they're consistently saying, we feel lost, we never know who's responsible for what portion of the class, then that would be a clear sign that, adjustment would need to be made. And then being flexible to change, I always tell my students, I'm going to make mistakes. So please, let me know in a respectful manner if you identify one of those mistakes. And so, we did move around a couple of kind of assignments, or made adjustments to some of those as we kind of worked through the class. And so that ended up being a helpful adjustment because it ultimately improved the students' performance in the class. So some just big picture advantages, we found that that the time that we had to develop this course was beneficial because we're really planning a half course. But really, I think, for me, one of the things that I enjoyed was just having, kind of the creative opportunity to get a different perspective on a problem, or like, on something that we were doing at work. So it gave us time to really kind of prioritize the content. As Susan described, we didn't just follow what had been done before, but you could do this from a sense of a class that you had been teaching before. Are there changes within your discipline? New information has come out, or best practices within that discipline. What are current events that could get infused in? Are there changes in curricular structure that maybe there were previous prerequisites that are not in place, or new prerequisites? So you have some opportunity to make changes to your class, and you really have somebody else to just kind of talk about it with, which can be really beneficial, sort of throw ideas around and see what sticks and what makes sense. Oops. Wow. Okay. Sorry. So some of the things that my mouse just went crazy, that we, some examples of that came out of our conversations. The class was originally scientific writing. We think that it should be scientific dissemination. We actually just did a curricular change this year. So, the following academic year, to say, hey, we want to change the title of this class so that it's more relevant with the sort of the scientific community, because not all dissemination comes from writing, and there's a lot of other mechanisms for doing that now. We've made some changes to specific assignment directions to make those clear, and then continue to enhance the rubric. Other advantages: it enabled us to teach a class that was new. You don't always, as a faculty member, have that that privilege or that opportunity. We oftentimes get locked into classes based on our content expertise. It's easy to just kind of do what you've always been doing. But as I mentioned earlier, just having some creative energy can really, infuse energy into your work life. And so that was something that we both enjoyed. And, it's always nice to be able to commiserate with somebody. When you have the exact same student in the exact same class, they really understand your feelings or the problems. And so that gave us, we had an opportunity to not just as an individual say, what student do we need to check in with, but like, does this make sense? Are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing? And we can do that a little bit within our program, or, within academics, if a student might be taking somebody else's class, but it's not necessarily the same because their performance in another class might be different. Okay, so big picture takeaways. We felt like, co-teaching enabled us to take on this new project. It gave us some time to do that. This was actually an overload for both of us. So it's not that we got less of a teaching load. It was that I assigned us, thank you, you're welcome, as chair that we would each be teaching an additional half class, if you will. But I think that kind of made it, for me, I know it made it way more manageable. Teaching a full overload class would have been much more difficult. So gave us some time, we learned some new things. We got to be creative, which was fun. And then we think it's really important that you be intentional and realistic when you're thinking about who you want to work with. Working with a good friend in the department or a program or on campus might sound great, but you have to think about what's their style and does it mesh with or align with your style. So have those thoughts, and then be willing to have some maybe really, not difficult conversations, but realistic conversations. And at the end of the day, if you've had that conversations about the possibility of co-teaching and it doesn't sound great, be willing to kind of walk away from it, right? And then also just back to our title, collaboration is not dividing and conquering, but really means having a plan and executing that plan and working together, so that it's not separate, but equal, but that it's, that it's more collaborative in nature. So with that, I know we're sort of at the end of our time period, but if there are any questions, we can answer those now, and then also happy to respond to any emails that people might have in the future.
I have a question. I have two.
Okay.
How did you handle course evaluations in terms of, two separate people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, Susan, do you remember? I think maybe they only came to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they only came to you.
I think they only showed up as mine just because there was sort of like a primary and secondary instructor on the schedule. I mean, as chair, I think that's something to consider if you need to look at that faculty members' evaluations. You're going to take that with a grain of salt, right? I mean, knowing that I think it'd be important to have some other forms of assessment of their teaching. So whether that was a peer observation or maybe an additional survey that you're asking the students about their experience beyond, because this is a different, it's a different structure than the typical norm. So I would want to have maybe some questions that we ask the students to get their perspective on how their experience was.
Yeah, I would agree. I would.
Go ahead.
Say too, I think we look at the subjective feedback from the student. Like, I think that's more important than the objective. And also, as to reiterate what Kate was saying, thinking about a faculty member who's maybe not in that pre-tenure process with teaching a course like this, because they won't have potentially may not have the evaluation numbers that they're looking for.
Yeah, or, people who are in different stages of their career, tenured faculty sometimes are like, oh, course evaluations, I haven't looked at mine in 4 years, not that that's Susan and I, but I do know that those people exist. So you don't want to put somebody like that with a faculty member who's really concerned about their teaching evaluations and need that as, significant evidence towards evaluation. That could create some conflict or some stress points.
Yeah. So did you two really, you did not just say, Susan, you take the first half of the course, I'll take the second half. You really collaborated on to different degrees, I would imagine, but collaborated on everything throughout the course?
I would say that as the course was going on, like if I had the third module, I was looking, I was posting the information. I wrote the module topic question, the questions, the content questions. I created the assignments in that module, somewhat tweaked those, but it all goes back to the beginning when we set that all up, and we already had all of that outlined, exactly what we were going to do. And then it was just whoever was assigned to that module doing it. So there was some independent, but then there was this constant working together on that. I might create an assignment and say, Kate, what do you think? Is this what we had in mind for that particular module?
Yeah, I think it was a mixture, like Susan just mentioned, within our module, we had some independent decision making, I found this article that I think would be really great for the students to read. about writing a method section on a scientific paper, right? I'm not going to say, Susan, you find one and I'll find one. We'll see who's better like that. I think it's finding a balance between collaboration and just redundancy. But it was more like, oh, I found this one, or I found these two. What do you think one is better than the other, right? So it's really my role at that time was to identify the resources, but I didn't want to make a unilateral decision without including her and getting her input. And so if we were like uncertain about something, I think that just goes back to our unique situation, which I acknowledge is not going to be the case for everybody, but we're comfortable working with one another, and I have good trust, right? I think that that's a really important component of a collaborative relationship, is that I'm going to trust that Susan's not only that she's going to do what she was assigned to do as part of our class development, but that she's going to do a good job, and I don't need to be like micromanaging that process, right? And that she's going to include me when it's appropriate and relevant. So maybe we should have just called this like a trust fall type of activity.
Well, you're right. As department chair, you need to make the right decision up front on who the people are going to co-teach. Otherwise, you're going to have a hassle all semester dealing with problems that are going on between them. That otherwise, yeah, I can see how it would be two people or whatever working together really can rethink a lot of things and bring different perspectives to the course that wouldn't be there otherwise.
I saw this meme the other day and I was like, you don't need a committee to do something. Just get two highly motivated women together and send them on a walk on a nice day and they'll figure out all the problems. And sometimes it's like, that's what it ends up being, But to your point, Bob, about being a chair, I mean, that last year was my first year as chair. So I definitely wasn't approaching it as like, oh, I'm a chair, I get to do this now. It was more about sort of just like stepping up to the plate, that the two of us recognized that we were in a situation where we could do this and maybe others couldn't do it. But I think as chair or as a program director, maybe you have what I would consider like veto power. Like, no, that doesn't sound like a good choice. I think we're going to go in a different direction and maybe make some other suggestions or arrangements with the the intention of making everybody's work situation better.
Yep, absolutely. Well, gee, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for
And I
participating.
know Kristen did before she had to leave.
Yeah,
So I really thank you guys for doing this.
you're welcome.
You're welcome.